Hey guys, welcome to Brian's Man Cave. So today's a little bit of a different video because I'm actually going to be doing kind of like a timeline, and I'm going to be talking about my history with the systems I have, the consoles I have, when I got them, and the games and all that, and just kind of going throughout each system. This was suggested to me from one of my viewers, actually, Mr. Postile. He left a comment in one of my videos. It was one of my Commodore 64 games that I was playing, and he was talking about how he was not familiar with the Commodore 64, and but he did jump into retro gaming. He started collecting all these systems, so he was like thinking it would be kind of fun if I did a video talking about my past. So I'm going to go back to my very first system that I remember. I'm pretty sure it was our first system, and that was the Intellivision. Now, that system was actually made in 1979. I don't think we had it in 79. I think we got it a little bit later than that. But I do remember my mom telling me it was very expensive of the day, especially, you know, parents that are working class parents, to be able to afford something like that. Like it's almost like a luxury item. So she had to literally scrimp and save to buy this Intellivision, and I knew nothing about video games. I mean, maybe I knew a little bit from possibly going to Chuck E. Cheese or something like that, but I was so young at the time, I didn't know anything about them. But I tinkered with the system. In fact, I don't know why, but I used to like playing this, and I didn't know what I was doing. But this was the game that every Intellivision came with, poker and blackjack, which is really weird. Why they would give a card game. I guess they thought, you know, the adults need something to play with or something, but or they thought maybe adults were buying the system for themselves. But this was an odd choice to for a pack-in game, especially when later systems like ColecoVision came packed with Donkey Kong, you know, a arcade smash hit. So yeah, I for whatever reason I tinkered around with this. I also played other favorites like Astro Smash, which I've talked about on my channel before, and you know, Space Armada, which is like a Space Invaders. We had a whole bunch of games, but the one that really stuck with me the most was actually Donkey Kong. And I've talked about this several times before, no surprise. This was the game that really got me into Donkey Kong, even though it's not the best version of Donkey Kong, and some people actually say it's the worst version of Donkey Kong. I wouldn't go that far. I've seen some pretty bad computer versions of the game. Graphically, I mean, yes, the game's a little basic. The controls are a little harder. But, you know, to me, this always stayed in my mind as one of those gifts I got. And I just played the heck out of this game. And it's probably what got me started really into gaming, was playing something like this. Moving away from the Intellivision, though, I mean, I always was playing it. But in '82, the Commodore 64 was released to North America, which is like the predecessor. Is that the right word? It came after the Commodore VIC-20, and the VIC-20. I mean, I had some friends that had a VIC-20, but by the time we got our Commodore 64, that was what I was more familiar with. I used to go over to their house, and I didn't really know too much of the difference between them. I could tell that obviously the VIC was a little more basic looking, but to me, I mean, they were both pretty cool systems, or computers, really. And that was my experience with, you know, getting into programming and actually doing things beyond playing games. Now, obviously, I spent more time playing games. Again, I played a lot of, like, we had Donkey Kong. Now, keep in mind, this was a time when people would share games and, you know, load them onto discs. You would write down all the games you have. Your friends would do the same, and you would copy games from discs and stuff. So you would get a lot of games. I mean, tons of games for your Commodore 64. And that's what made it different than, say, with the Intellivision, where I only had, like, a stack of games, like a small stack of games, because games were expensive. Just like today, brand new games are expensive. They go for, like, you know, anywhere from $50 to $80 for a game, right? So back then, it was no different. Games were expensive. So when you did have a small stack, that was all you got to play. The Commodore 64 comes along, and it's a computer with discs you could save onto, and we had a ton of games. Now, a lot of them I wasn't too familiar with the background history of the game or anything like that. In fact, a lot of the ones I played, I didn't even know they were ports from arcades. They were ports from the Atari. I didn't know that. I just had these games and I played them. And I played a lot of them. I played a lot of Commodore 64 games. In fact, throughout the years, buying newer Commodore 64 games as they came out, I amassed quite a big collection of games. Unfortunately, my disk drive for the Commodore 64 started to go. I had it repaired, and then again it started to go, and my mom was like, you know what, time to get rid of this. You have newer systems, and I ended up selling off my Commodore 64 to a store for parts, I guess, and but I got to keep the games because he didn't want the copied games. So I was able to keep my games, and I still have them today, which is good because I got a Commodore 64 now. But moving on from the Commodore 64, that's when I got really my first introduction with Atari. I know a lot of people, they started on the Atari. I didn't have an Atari. I had a friend who had an Atari, and that's just the way things were. You had a friend who had this system, another friend who had that system. Everybody had their own system, their own computers. So you'd go over to each other's houses just to play those games. So I really didn't get my Atari until the Junior came out. In fact, this is the one I still have. This is the one I got. And I picked this up when, Atari Junior came out, 86? The Atari 2600 came out much earlier, 78, 79. Whereas this is a kind of a remodeled version of it that they sold for very cheap. It was $49 or something. And the games were released. And I saw the games in the store, and this one caught my eye, Keystone Capers. And I think that's the reason why I wanted the Atari. It was, basic compared to what I was used to because I was playing Commodore 64 games, and to some degree Intellivision being a lot more advanced. So it was kind of taking a step backwards, but I didn't care because I saw some of these games and they looked really cool to me. And I just thought it'd be really neat to have an Atari. It wasn't like I was not familiar with the Atari. Like I said, I had a friend who had one. I remember borrowing it for a while and playing it while they were on vacation. They lent it to me and I was able to play, it was a classic wood grain Atari. And they had a whole suitcase full of games, and I spent a lot of time playing the classic Atari. But this was my first experience, and this was probably, 86, 87 when I would have bought this, just after it got released. And so, you got to think, even Nintendo was out at this time. I didn't have a Nintendo. I was kind of jealous that my friend had one, and I used to go over to his house all the time and play this. Well, my shirt. The Legend of Zelda. I was blown away by this game. In fact, I really loved this game too. Super Mario Brothers. So going over there and seeing these games, they were so much better than what I could get on my Commodore 64, and definitely much better than what I can get on my Atari. In fact, playing Keystone Capers was as close as I could get to playing something like a platformer. So it was really interesting to see these games, and I didn't get an NES until a little bit later on. Now, the NES obviously came out, 85, 86. I probably got my NES around probably 88, 89, I would think. After it was a little more, available in shelves, the price kind of came down. I got mine, obviously, with this, with the Duck Hunt. It was the NES action set, I think it was. Came with the gun, came with Duck Hunt, and there was a third one with the trackpad and all that, but I didn't obviously I didn't get that one. But this one was good enough for me, and I loved playing on the Nintendo. I didn't have a lot of games though. I played the heck out of Super Mario Brothers, and the other game that I really, really wanted, and this was what was bugging me because I really wanted a Nintendo for it, was Tetris. Because at the time, Tetris was huge. Everybody was talking about Tetris. And the lucky few actually had the Game Boy, which came with Tetris. And I was so jealous of all the kids that would come into school and have this Game Boy playing Tetris. And before I had this one, actually, I remember renting the other one. I think it was the Tengen one The one that's it's got like a 2-player mode. It's much more rare today. I remember renting that because I didn't have this yet. And, you know, thank goodness we were able to rent games at that time, because I probably wouldn't have played very much Nintendo if we couldn't rent games, because there was no way I was going to convince my parents to buy me, you know, $50, $60 games all the time I wanted to play Nintendo. Wasn't going to happen. After my NES, you know, I never stopped playing these things. It's just, you know, you move on to another system. And I believe, I mean, it's stretching my memory, but I believe my next system after that was the Sega Genesis. It was released, I mean, the original one was released 89, 90. Then they released another one, which was kind of like a, you know, a re-release of it, which was a little bit cheaper. And I thought that might be a cool system to have. And so I think it was one of my Christmas presents. One year I was like, why not? How about that? And so I ended up getting the Sega Genesis, and the only games I really wanted on it was Taz and Sonic. And I think those were the only games I really played on it. Eventually I got, you know, a few other games. I can't remember the other one I got. I used to play it a lot, but I honestly didn't have a whole lot of games for it. And I was still playing a lot of my Nintendo at the time. That's when Nintendo games were becoming cheaper, so you can go into like the, you know, we didn't have Walmart at the time, but Kmart and places like that, and they would be like $10 games. So at that time I started stocking up on Nintendo games. I still don't have a whole lot, but, you know, I got all the ones I really wanted. So for the Genesis, I mean, that's what I started really playing. That was my first real experience in the 16-bit era. I didn't have a SNES yet. And unfortunately, my Genesis got stolen. People broke into my house, took some stuff, and the Genesis was one of them. Thankfully, they left my Nintendo. I would have been really upset if I didn't have my Nintendo, but the Genesis was gone in all the games. So it wasn't until much later I was able to find a Genesis again in a second-hand shop, and I've been slowly trying to build up my games. I'm still very far behind in games on Genesis. It's crazy. Like, it's just trying to build up my collection again. You know, and well, there's all these other things that I wanted to still get, so the Genesis just kind of fell behind. But after that, I mean, then the Super Nintendo, again, the SNES was released in '91, but then they created the SNES Mini, which is the one I have. I think it's called Mini, or something along that lines. It's like a smaller, compact version. The buttons are different, and that's the one I ended up getting. And again, it was because it was cheaper in price, and so I decided to pick it up. I didn't really play a whole lot on that. I still don't have a lot of games for it. I picked up some of the more popular stuff. You know, I played the Super Mario World, and but I just never really caught on. The only game that I really enjoyed playing and still play, I'm actually in the middle of playing right now, is the Zelda version, Zelda, was it A Link to the Past, which I think is a brilliant game. I spent lots of time on that game, and I still like, you know, reintroducing myself to it and just playing it again. And so I'm in the middle of that right now, which is, it's actually, you know, pretty fun. I'm not recording it or anything like that. It's just for fun. But that's my experience there. Around this time, though, this is where it gets murky, because I know I was picking up systems all over the place. I know I ended up acquiring an Intellivision 2, which I think I found it in maybe I found it on eBay. I think I just searched for it and I found it. For whatever reason, I wanted one. I didn't need it because I still have my Intellivision that I ended up picking up again later on after my original one was broken. So I picked up an Intellivision, and a lot of these I was just kind of grabbing at random times. I'd go into a secondhand store, I'd find the Intellivision, or I'd find this, or I'd find that, I'd grab them. So I'm not sure what the timeline for, like, getting these systems again, I would say. But definitely was able to start building up my collection pretty fast. The Intellivision I'm using now, actually, I got lucky and I found one in the Penny Saver. Somebody had it there, and it was still in the box. They said they had it at their cottage or something like that, and they had a ton of games with it. and they just wanted to get rid of it, and I ended up picking it up for dirt cheap. So that was like really exciting for me to grab that system again. And then the other one I picked up was a second-hand one. The only other system that I do remember picking up, and again, the timeline is fuzzy on this one. It was around the same time I think I got my SNES, or maybe just before that, was my ColecoVision. Again, one of those systems that I wanted, but I couldn't get my hands on it until a lot later on. And I remember going downtown Toronto, and one of the video game stores there, and I mentioned to the guy, I'm like, you know, it'd be cool if I could find a ColecoVision. And he just said, you know, at that point, he's like, oh, I have my original ColecoVision I had when I was a kid. I don't even play it. Do you want it? I'll sell it to you for like, I don't know, 20 bucks. And I'm like, sure. So he ended up selling me his Coleco plus a couple of games, and I was like super excited because it was a system that even though I had the Intellivision as a kid, I always, you know, thought the ColecoVision was really awesome. It had a much better version of Donkey Kong. Actually, a friend of the family had a ColecoVision, so every time I went to their house, I always wanted to play on it. It's an amazing system, and I was just so happy to get my hands on one again. I'm always worried about it breaking on me, though, because, you know, it's sometimes it gives me a hard time playing games, and the graphics all get fuzzy. I don't know. I've tried cleaning it, whatever. So moving on from my ColecoVision now, again, this was all in the mid-90s when I was buying a lot of these things. And this was before retro gaming was a thing. I mean, people didn't really collect this stuff. Nobody cared about this stuff. Most of this stuff was garbage to people, or just garage sale stuff, or if you found it in a store, people would put really ridiculously low price tags on it. Nobody thought any of this stuff was worth any money. So picking it up was pretty easy and dirt cheap. But then I thought, you know, I've been playing a lot of the old games. I didn't have anything modern, and I thought, I need to pick up something a little bit more modern. I ended up grabbing an N64 when it came on sale. Actually, the one I wanted was this one with the Pokemon Stadium. So that's the one I picked up. It actually came in a special box. I probably threw it away like an idiot. I remember because I think it had like a Bulbasaur on it or something, like one of the Pokemon. It came with a card, which I know I still have. And I just thought this game looked pretty cool. I wanted to play it. So that's what I picked up, was the Pokemon Stadium N64. And again, I bought certain games for it. I bought the Donkey Kong 64, Mario 64, Zelda, Ocarina of Time. Bunch of titles like that. Didn't really spend too much time on it. Unfortunately, I don't know, I always have a hard time with some of these three-dimensional games. I always call myself a 2D player, because whenever I get into 3 dimensions, I just seem to get lost, or have a hard time controlling the characters or whatever. So, moving on from there, though, I actually thought the PlayStation is something that looked fascinating to me. I wanted to get things like, you know, well, I knew there was stuff like this on there, like the classic games and stuff like that. But I also thought Tomb Raider looked pretty interesting, and I wanted to get my hands on that. So I bought a PlayStation, and again, it was not when it came out. PlayStation, when I wrote it down there, 1995, when PlayStation came out. Probably by the time I got one, it was nearing the time when the PlayStation 2 was about to be released. So I picked it up a lot cheaper because it was on sale. A lot of the PlayStation games were re-releasing. You know, like the Tomb Raider I got was like a re-release of it, so it was much cheaper. And I picked up a bunch of titles. Most of the stuff, though, I ended up buying for the PlayStation was stuff like this, though. The classic games, like a lot of the old games and stuff like that. And I kind of questioned myself, why am I doing this? Because I own all the original systems. I own all the original games. I just thought maybe it's just more convenient. I could just have my one system set up and play classic games on it. But, you know, something was just different about it. You know, the controllers are different. The controllers are wrong. If you look at the Intellivision controller, it has the disc, it has the number pad. When you're playing on a PlayStation, you're playing on a gamepad. It's different, right? So there's a little bit of a different feel. You don't get the joystick feel that you have when you play Atari. So for me, the experience was just a little bit different. And then I moved on, obviously, to the PlayStation 2. It came out. I'm not sure what really kind of got me to want to pick one up. It was kind of a spur of the moment. I remember I was walking through the mall and I saw one for sale, and I thought, well, that might be cool. PlayStation 2, there's a lot of great games. The PlayStation 1's already getting too old. All the games that were coming out looked neat. And I was like, hey, why not? I picked up a PlayStation 2. Again, didn't spend a whole lot of time on it. I think I just used it as a replacement PlayStation, put my old one away, and just was like still buying regular PlayStation games to play on it. Thank goodness it had the backwards compatibility. I never really got into the Xbox. It was one of those things like I thought, well, I have PlayStation, what do I need Xbox for? I just didn't think about ever picking one up. And I still to this day don't have an Xbox. And moving on to like the Nintendo, I don't know why I stopped. I mean, this is when we're getting into all the disc systems, like the Sega had a disc system. Then it was like, what else had the disc system? There was, the GameCube. Again, I didn't, with my experience from the N64 and not being good at these types of games, I kind of spared myself and I didn't go for the GameCube. However, moving forward, when the Nintendo Wii came out, I just thought that was like really cool. It's so different than anything else because of the way the motion controllers were. But to tell you the truth, the only game that I really wanted was the Wii Sports. And I think a lot of people bought a Wii just for the Wii Sports, right? And so picking up titles for that was kind of the same thing. I was picking up the classic stuff. I was picking up Mario Brothers. I was picking up. I even picked up a Back to the Future game, which is just like it's not really like it's more like a word-based or like a clue type of game where you just got to solve a mystery. It's not really like a video game. I picked up like Impossible Mission, which is a classic from the Commodore 64 days. All these kind of older titles that I picked up. And again, I didn't, like, I've gone and looked at all the games on the Wii, and none of them seemed appealing to me, so I just stopped buying Wii games. I was just like, that's it. I don't even remember the last time I actually plugged it in and played it. And so naturally I avoided the Wii U, and now we're into the Nintendo Switches out, which, I don't know, it looks interesting to me. It's just out of my price range, way out of my price range. As you notice, based on what I've been saying, a lot of the systems I bought a lot after the fact, when the prices all came down. And, the newer systems were already out. I was buying the older systems. So, who knows? I mean, I'm not going to say I'll never have a Switch, but it's hard to say. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about it because, I do have a lot of different systems that I really relate to. I don't just buy systems for the sake of buying systems. There was actually one I left out, and that was the Sega Master System. And I think I picked that one up in it was a thrift shop. And I did a video on it as well, where I talked about that one. But I don't remember when I picked it up. It was like probably around the same time I had the Super Nintendo. I probably found it in a store there. Again, systems like that were going for cheap. Nobody cared about them. I think I picked it up for $15 with all the games with it. So, really cheap. Anyways, yeah, that's a lot of stuff that I just talked about there. I'm probably off on some of my timelines. I mean, it gets fuzzy, after all these years. I still think of the 90s as being, just a few weeks ago. It's kind of weird, you kind of forget that it's been like 30 plus years, things like that. You just kind of like, whoa. But that's the way time works, and that's probably why I like nostalgia. That's why I like my Atari, my Intellivision, ColecoVision, all the things that I have here. That's why I like them, because it brings back the memories. It takes you back to those days, and you just remember playing these things. Every one of these games always has some kind of memory attached with them. I hope you liked the video. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Hope you subscribe to my channel, and I talk to you later.